Week 2 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. So what a debut was for Saquon Barkley. 3 touchdowns versus the Green Bay Packers. And coming into the year, I thought Saquon Barkley would fit this offense like a glove. And the best offense he's obviously played on in his career with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, Jalen Hurts, a quarterback. And this week, a pretty good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, where Najee Harris even went out there and looked pretty good. So this week, with CMC most likely out, Saquon Barkley gets that number 1 spot. Number 2, Breece Hall with the New York Jets. Breece Hall, he looked pretty good in the season opener at a tough San Francisco 49er defense. And this week, a pretty decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans. I know the Titans, they bottled up DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert. Defense played well, and their offense did them in that ball game. But Breece Hall, with Aaron Rodgers back at quarterback, I think he's going to have a great season once again. He could catch the football out of the backfield, and he's a real 3-down workhorse. And this week, even in the middle of the pack matchup, I have him having a big game. Number 3, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So this week, Monday Night Football at the Philadelphia Eagles. Bijan Robinson, he pretty much got 90% of the touches in that ball game in week 1. And with Arthur Smith gone and the offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh now, Bijan Robinson, there's going to be no limitations. He's going to get tons of touches. And coming into the year, he's my number 2-3 running back, right in that range. It's a pick or choose between him and Breece Hall. And this week at Philadelphia, we saw Josh Jacobs have some success late in that game. I think Bijan can as well. Number 4, Joe Mixon of the Houston Texans. So Mixon making his Texan debut in week 1, went off with a monster performance, over 25 fantasy points. And this week, good matchup versus the Chicago Bears. We saw Tony Pollard run well versus this Bear team in week 1. And Joe Mixon fits this offense like a glove. And when you have all those weapons, it's going to be a light box. And he just fits well and has another big game. Number 5, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So Kyren Williams, a lot of people thought Blake Corum was going to eat into the workload, especially that Kyren Williams is the punt returner. But week 1, he got pretty much all the touches at the running back position. Last season, he was a league winner for tons of fantasy owners. And this week, a good matchup at the Arizona Cardinals that really can't stop anyone on the ground or through the air. So I think Kyren Williams has another big week. Number 6, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. I know Achane right now, he's missed practice over the last couple days with a Thursday night ball game coming up versus the Buffalo Bills. But Achane had a strong workload in week 1 where Raheem Mostert, he wasn't even a factor for the most part, and he's banged up with a chest injury as well. And Achane showed what he could do in the receiving game, and he showed the burst and the athleticism. So this week, if he's healthy, Achane, I think each and every week he's a top 10 option. And this is going to be a shootout most likely on Thursday night with 2 high-scoring offenses. And obviously those Thursday night games usually are high-scoring. Number 7, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So it was not much going on in week 1 for Jonathan Taylor. It was the Anthony Richardson show, and he put on a big performance with 30 fantasy points, was Richardson. But this week, a pretty decent matchup in a game where I think Indianapolis will be in control and run the football more. Where last week it was a back and forth and come from behind most of the game trying to win that, but they fell short. So Taylor, we know he's a first, early second round pick. And after coming off a bad game, I think in a decent matchup where the game script should go his way, he bounces back. Number 8, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a running back that don't need a crazy workload. And him and David Montgomery, it's a nice 50-50 split between these 2 running backs. So Gibbs, the more explosive, more passing downs back over there in Detroit. He gets his own drives, and Montgomery gets his. And this week in a matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where the running backs for Washington did good last week, and Brian Robinson in Austin Eckler, I see Gibbs having another nice performance. Number 9, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So this is a good matchup for James Cook at the Dolphins. We saw the Jaguars run the football effectively with Tank Bigsby even getting into the mix, almost 7 yards per carry. And Travis Etienne, the fumble issues did him in. But James Cook, he's a 3-down back. Ray Davis wasn't really a threat to him in week 1, only with a couple touches. And this week in a high-scoring game that it should be, I like Cook once again. Number 10, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Pacheco, he's been a workhorse in the backfield the last couple of years for this Chief team. P. Ryan wasn't really getting many touches in that ball game. I know the rookie Steele got some looks, but Pacheco, a big physical back, could catch the football out of the backfield, and he fits perfectly with this Kansas City Chief team wants to do. They want to be a balanced offense, and they have over the last couple seasons with Pacheco. Number 11, Derrick Henry of the Baltimore Ravens. So Derrick Henry was a down game for him, and games where they're going to be trailing it's going to be down games, and he's not going to put up big numbers. But this week, a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders for Derrick Henry, where they got torched by J.K. Dobbins, who had 13 yards per carry in week 1. So I think Derrick Henry and this Baltimore team, they're going to control the game. They're going to control the line of scrimmage and the clock, and Henry bounces back with a big performance. Number 12, Jordan Mason of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jordan Mason, he had a breakout performance in CMC. It's not just a calf, it's an Achilles as well. Shanahan came out and said so. This week, a pretty good matchup with the Minnesota Vikings. Just put up a monster game versus one of the better Ds in the league in the New York Jets. And I think Mason every week could be a top 10, 12 option as long as CMC's out. But obviously, if CMC plays, Mason's going to be down on the list. I still think he would get work. CMC don't sound like he's 100%. But Jordan Mason this week, if McCaffrey don't play, he's number 12. Number 13, Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. Kamara last week had a nice game, 47-10 victory for this Saint team. And this week, it's not a great matchup at the Dallas Cowboys, where their defense, for the most part, has bottled up running backs over the last couple seasons. And last week, I know Ford scored a touchdown, had a decent fantasy day. But Kamara and this Saint offense, it might be tough sledding for the majority. But Kamara on workload and just volume, I think he's going to work his way into a decent performance. One of the better PPR running backs in the league. So this week, I think Kamara is an RB1-2 option. Number 14, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So he got off to a slow start in the beginning of that game, and then he took off before he went down with an abdominal injury. So we don't know if he's going to play in this one as Kenneth Walker. But if he does, he's a top 15 back, in my opinion. Pretty decent matchup at the New England Patriots, even though we didn't see much of the backfield in Cincinnati in week 1 have a big game. But Kenneth Walker is an explosive running back. I think this could be a big year for him. And if he's out, though, Zach Charbonnet really jumps up the list in this top 15, 18 area. 15, J.K. Dobbins, Los Angeles Chargers. So talent's never been an issue with J.K. Dobbins. Injuries have always been the issue for him. And last week, he went out there, 10 carries, 135 yards, and a touchdown. And this week, an easy matchup with the Carolina Panthers that can't stop anyone and one of the worst teams and defenses in the league. So I think J.K. Dobbins, even on limited touches, once again, has a nice game. 16, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rachaad White, one of the best receiving backs in all pro football. But in between the tackles and yard per carry, he's not that efficient. But they don't need him to be, is this Tampa Bay Buc team. They could bring Bucky Irvin in for those tough in between the tackle runs. And Rachaad White could do his thing in the receiving game like he did last week. So White, just on catching the football and yards after catch, is one of the best backs at doing that. And every week, he's going to be a top 20 option. Number 17, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So a couple things with Etienne. The fumbles were an issue for him, obviously, in week 1. Tank Bigsby got 12 touches. He looked good, almost 7 yards per carry. And this week, it's a tougher matchup versus the Cleveland Browns that have one of the better defenses in the league, even though the Cowboys did what they had to do in week 1 versus Brown team. I think Etienne is going to have tough sledding. And if it is a split of a sort, 60-40 or 50-50, the ETN numbers might not be great, but he's another running back that can catch the football out of the backfield and make explosive plays. 18, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So Josh Jacobs and this whole Packer offense, their value goes down. After now, Jordan Love's out 3 to 6 weeks, MCL injury. Malik Willis in there, quarterback. But Jacobs on workload and volume is just going to get a ton of touches because they don't want Malik Willis throwing the football 25 to 35 times in this one. But this week, a pretty good matchup versus Indianapolis where we saw Joe Mixon torch him on the ground. And right now, like I said, even if Jacobs doesn't have a great game, just on the touches alone, where I believe 20, 25 he's going to get, he's going to work in his way into scoring. 19, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. Conner, what a game it was for him last week, and pretty much the only offensive weapon that did much. Marvin Harrison and McBride didn't do much. This week, it's going to be a high-scoring game, I believe, between two division rivals in the NFC West, between the Arizona Cardinals and this Los Angeles Ram team. And James Conner, he's a 3-down back. Trey Benson, he got some work, but it wasn't much of a threat to Conner's workload. And this week, I think James Conner has another good game. 20, Brian Robinson Jr. of the Washington Commanders. Brian Robinson, he had command of the backfield in week 1. He outtouched Austin Eckler by a lot. He could catch the football out of the backfield as well. And this week, a great matchup versus the New York Giants that can't stop anyone. And we saw Aaron Jones have a nice game, and Ty Chandler, even as the backup, put up some decent numbers. So Brian Robinson with a good matchup, and it looks like he's the easy favorite for the most touches in that backfield is a top 20 option. 21, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. I thought Ford wasn't going to have a good game last week, but he worked his way into production. Not a 50-50 split or anything like that. Pierre Strong only got a few touches, and Jerome Ford could catch the football out of the backfield and pretty good in between the tackles for a smaller back. And this week, a decent matchup at the Jaguars with Devon Achane did whatever he wanted in that week 1 game. So I think Jerome Ford weekly until Nick Chubb comes back. Now, where the matchups get a little bit better, it could be a top 24 option. 22, Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. Last week, what a ball game it was for him and the Patriots at Cincinnati. 120 rush yards, found the end zone as Stevenson. And obviously, this Patriot team likes him a lot, got a contract extension in the offseason. And right now, this week, in a decent matchup versus the Seahawks, I think Stevenson could play his way into production. 23, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. This week, a decent matchup versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like I said, both backs played decent for Washington. Robinson found the end zone. He did a little bit of everything. Austin Eckler led the team in receiving last week for the Commanders. And I think David Montgomery, him and Gibbs is a great 1-2 combo. And we saw both of them have good production last week. And I think once again this week it will happen. 24, DeAndre Swift, the Chicago Bears. So maybe I'm higher on Swift than other people. I know last week 10 carries, 30 yards. He didn't do much at all. This week at Houston, I can't see it being any worse than the offensive performance the Bears put on last week. And DeAndre Swift, he's going to get the touches. He got a good contract in the offseason. And Khalil Herbert, he didn't really get many touches in that game. So I think it was just an off game for DeAndre Swift and the Bears offense as a whole. But I think this week he goes out there and puts in a good ball game. 25, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. This week a tough matchup versus the Niners. I know Breece Hall went out there, had a nice game versus San Francisco. San Francisco defensive line is vicious, and this week I think it's going to be a one-dimensional type of offense. San Francisco is going to force this Minnesota Viking team to play off to an early 10-14 point lead and then make them one-dimensional and have to throw the football 35-40 times. I know Aaron Jones is a decent receiver out of the backfield, but Ty Chandler in that week 1 game, he got some third down looks and passing down looks as well. And this week, where it's going to be a game where they're playing from behind, I believe, early and often is Minnesota. Aaron Jones' numbers are going to take a hit from where they did last week. 26, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Najee Harris, I wasn't big on him coming into the season. And I'm still not, but the only thing last week, he got tons of touches where Jalen Warren barely saw the field. And Warren's not 100% with the hamstring injury. This week, a pretty decent matchup at Denver where we saw Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet both have nice ball games last week. And I think Harris, where he's not an explosive running back anymore, is still someone who could be a serviceable flex or low-end RB2 option. 27, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So Pollard, he had a majority of the touches where I thought it'd be more of a 50-50 split between him and Tajay Spears going into the year. But this week, a tough matchup versus the Jets. I don't expect much out of Tony Pollard. It was good to see him break one loose and have a nice ball game in week 1. But this week versus a tough defense, even though Jordan Mason did tear him apart and put up a monster ball game, I don't see Tony Pollard doing it. And this Jet team, the game plan is going to be stop the run and force Will Levis to try to beat him. And I don't think that's going to be a recipe for success for Tennessee. 28, Zach Moss of the Cincinnati Bengals. So a tough matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs. Last week, like I said, they bottled up Derrick Henry. He only had 46 rushing yards in that ball game. I know the touches were limited of the game script, but Zach Moss last week, he found the end zone. He played a decent game, and he was the favorite for a lot of touches over Chase Brown in the backfield. But this week at Kansas City, in a ball game where I expect Cincinnati to be trailing early and often and try to go up and down the field and keep up with the Chiefs offense. They're going to throw a whole lot, and Zach Moss isn't that great of a receiver out of the backfield. 29, Gus Edwards of Los Angeles Chargers. So coming into the year, 50-50 split, many people expected. And we saw it last week, but J.K. Dobbins outperformed Gus Edwards big time. But this week, I think Gus Edwards, he could get a couple goal line stampers. He's still the goal line back, short yardage back. And this week, it's a great matchup at the Carolina Panthers, where they're one of the worst defenses in the league. Number 30, Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. I don't know if Mostert's going to play in this game. Him and Achane both missed practice the last 2 days with this Thursday night game coming up. He missed it with the chest. Achane, like I mentioned earlier, with the ankle. And we'll see. So if Mostert don't play, Jeff Wilson, I assume, will get the touches, or even maybe the rookie Wright. But this week's going to be a shootout type of game between the division rivals, Buffalo Bills, and this Miami Dolphin team. But I think Raheem Mostert, if he does play, is a bottom end back 31 Devin Singletary of the New York Giants. He didn't play bad last week with Singletary. A mediocre game, 9.20 fantasy points in PPR league. But this week, we'll see how this game goes. I know it's a decent matchup at the Washington Commanders, where we saw Rachaad White and Bucky Irvin in week 1 have good success versus this defense. But Singletary's tough to trust. And running back position, some guys have emerged already after only 1 week, so he's pretty down on this list. 32, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin got more touches, and the way this game script could go as well is with Javonte Williams. He might not get a lot of work once again. Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the better defenses in the league. Last week, I thought they did a decent job on Bijan Robinson, and Bijan obviously catching the football out of the backfield was effective, but Javonte Williams isn't anywhere close to Bijan as being a receiving back. And this week, like I said, it's probably going to be a 50-50 split with him and Jaleel McLaughlin. And last week, Javonte Williams just didn't have any pop. He's low on the list as well. 33, Zamir White of the Las Vegas Raiders. A couple factors against White. It's a bad matchup at Baltimore, one of the better run defenses in the league. Also, Alexander Mattison, he might get more play once again if they're trailing. He's the passing downs back. We saw it last week, obviously. So with the game script most likely against Zamir White in this one, and a tough matchup in general, even if it's a close game, he's down this week. 34, Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. So last week, Ezekiel Elliott, he had majority of the touches in the backfield where Rico Dotto split in. I don't think Dalvin Cook's going to get a chance much this year to have any opportunity unless there's injury. And Deuce Vaughn, he's the 4th or 5th back. So Ezekiel Elliott early in the season right now is the lead back for this Cowboy team. And Elliott, he's going to get his goal line chances no matter what every week for this Cowboy team. And he don't need a lot of touches to put up some numbers. If he gets 10, 12 touches per game and he gets a goal line touchdown, I think Elliott could be decent for fantasy owners. But this week, he's a low-end option versus the Saints. And like I said, this Cowboy team's a pass-first offense anyway. 35, Austin Eckler of the Washington Commanders. So Austin Eckler, he only had a couple touches, but he did have 4 catches, 52 yards. And this week, it's a good matchup versus the Giants, where we saw Minnesota Vikings, which is a middle-of-pack to a poor offense on paper coming into the year, have their way with this New York Giant defense. Brian Robinson being the lead back, but Austin Eckler still could bring flex appeal to fantasy owners this week. The 6th and final back on rankings, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I was big on Warren coming into the year, taking over the job. But week 1, he got out-touched big time by Najee Harris. And I just don't think he's 100% with the hamstring injuries, Jaylen Warren. But he's a better receiver out of the backfield. Last season, over 50 receptions. And this week at Denver, it's going to be a grinded-out type of game where both these teams, I think, are similar, where they rely more on the running game on their defenses than the passing game. But Jaylen Warren, I got to see more touches out of him, and he's bumped down the list from last week to this week. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for week 2 of the fantasy football season.